This is the interview with Professor Yung Ho Chang for the 150th MIT celebration. And let me start by asking, where were you born?
So I was born in Beijing.
Can you tell me a little bit about your family?
Actually, my father was an architect. So my family, both my parents, were from the Shanghai region, and then my mom's family, which was huge. She had 9 sisters and 2 brothers, and they all moved up north. And then my father went to Beijing to work. So the family ended up in Beijing. I have a brother. In China, my accent is very northern, very Beijing, and even my look is actually very northern, but actually I got the southern genes, so that's who I am.
Are there any significant events or influences from your childhood that you think have contributed to your professional work?
That's an interesting question, because as far as my life, or really the life of my generation is concerned, probably the most influential historic event is the Great Cultural Revolution, which happened during the late 60s to early 70s. That really changed the outlook of, again, probably more than one generation even. So now, although I became an architect, my friends were doing work in different fields, but we think that was really the life-changing event.
Can you talk a little bit about the way in which it changed or shaped?
I was using the American term. I was a third grader at that time. I was in elementary school. I don't even know how to begin to describe it to you. So basically, my brother and I, the school closed down, and then one day the so-called Red Guards, and they were just a little older than I was. They were probably teenagers in high schools, high school students. They came to our house and smashed the place and took things away and so on. It just, for me, it happened like this. And then after high school, well, my brother was not as lucky as I was, so he went to the military farm in Inner Mongolia and worked as a farmer for 5.5 years. So I was able to finish high school. He missed out the entire high school in a period. After high school, I was in high school for 5 years, although I missed out a couple of years, maybe 3. And then I started to work as a laborer on the construction site. And then that place I was helping to build was a research institute for chemistry and metallurgy, right? That's how you say it. And then I was studying English, so I landed a job in its library. It just nothing was really, it wasn't the typical sort of a childhood and youth for anyone. It was whole series of totally chaotic, incomprehensible, for a kid, events, and very traumatic too. There are events I don't know how to describe them to you. Like my father and actually both of my parents were put on stage to be what would be the English word? They were punished, right, and so on. So I don't know if you get an idea. Of what's
Yes,
going on.
it sounds like you felt in danger and uncertain a lot.
Yeah. So our life were literally threatened. I had a problem coming and going to school because the kids in the neighborhoods would beat me up and so on because of my family. So.
Was it the work in construction that started getting you interested in architecture, or was that earlier from your dad?
See, the construction part at that time really didn't mean anything, but I was lucky, of course, to do that. What happened was that, so in 1966, the Cultural Revolution broke out, and then it took 10 years to finish up. So in 1977, all the colleges reopened and held the first entrance examination after the Cultural Revolution. So my brother, 10 years of high school students, we all took the exam at the same time. So my brother and I, we all took that. And then, of course, all of a sudden we had to decide what we wanted to study. I was interested in art. Had to do with influence from my dad. So I wanted to study painting, Western oil painting. That was really the thing I was into. And then, however, my paintings were really terrible. We got relatives who are actually painters to take a look at my paintings, and so very consistently they all said, "No, don't apply," because there were two things: young people were able to learn at home, is painting and music. You can't study science, right, for instance, at home and so on. So there were a lot of very talented young painters. And then my family is very different from a typical Chinese family. Otherwise, my parents couldn't care less what we were doing. The Chinese family is like, study, take some additional courses, or really work at home. Not my family. My brother and I, we just had a good time. We always play. So anyway, so I thought, since I couldn't really go to art school, I thought maybe I could study design. I thought about product design. And then even the design school was very crowded with people who can really paint and draw. So I was at loss with what I wanted to study. One thing was clear, was that I want to go to college. It really doesn't matter what to study. That's what my brother did in the end. It wasn't terrible, but he actually wanted to be an engineer. But since he had no high school education, he couldn't possibly get into the engineering school. So he studied economics first, and he got an MBA later on, and so on. But anyway, so in my case, I thought maybe I could study design, actually industrial or product design. But I also was just hopeless to get into the design school. And then my father made a suggestion, and he said to me, look, you may want to consider what I do. You don't have to be good with painting. You don't have to be good with math or science courses. And I wasn't good with any of those things. So why don't you consider that? And then that's exactly what I did. So I went to Nanjing. That's the oldest school of architecture, still one of the best, and that's where my father went.
So how did you come to go from Nanking to Muncie, Indiana?
So in 77, 78, I was already in Nanjing, and then I heard from my father. There is a professor in Muncie, Indiana, at Ball State University. Contacted him. His name is Marvin Roseman. Marvin was interested in China, but at that time, very few people had the opportunity to visit China, and he was reading a magazine. I think it's House and Garden, a magazine he shouldn't have read, right? Just kidding. It's totally not very professional and more for the housewives. Anyway, he read that magazine. There was an interview with a Chinese architect, very, very unusual. And that architect was my father. And so he contacted the magazine, and then he wrote to my father and asked if my father could help him to arrange a trip to go to China. And then my father, through the China Society of Architecture, and extended an invitation to him, and probably helped out in some other ways. So Marvin came to China in 79 or 80 to China with 19 students from Ball State. And then they visited 4 cities. Each has one of the architectures, the better architecture schools. So Beijing, Tianjin, and Shanghai, and Nanjing. So I actually met Marvin for the first time. So that's one story. Another story was that in the late 40s, my father got into, I think it's University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, to study. So everything, he got his passport, visa, scholarship. So everything was set for him to go. And then there was a regime change. So the communists took over the country. And so he was like a lot of young people. He had hope for the new regime. But also as an architect, he thought there were opportunities for him as an architect. So for the second part, he was actually very much right. So he got a lot of job for a short period of time. And then for the first part, he was actually very much disappointed. So he regretted later in his life that he didn't go to the U.S. He regretted that he didn't really leave China. He wasn't a very ideological kind of a person. He thought he would do better as an architect elsewhere, maybe in Hong Kong and so on. So he really urged my brother and I to go somewhere else. my brother, who's 2.5 years older, he left China first. We have relatives. We had even more at that time in California, in the Bay Area. So my brother left for the U.S. in 1980, and then so the combination of the Ball State delegation and my father's encouragement, so I left for the U.S. in 1981. And I knew nothing about the U.S. and the English textbooks we studied were from England. It was all about London, probably in I don't know, 1930s. They were pretty old, and about Oxford and Cambridge, the the other Cambridge and so on. So I didn't know what to expect. The only image of the U.S. was really a postcard sort of Manhattan. So anyway, and then I ended up in Muncie. I took a Greyhound bus from San Francisco. So I that was the real cultural shock I really experienced.
You saw a lot of the country.
Yeah, a lot of cornfields, and a deteriorating downtown, which I just I didn't know what I expected. Maybe Manhattan. So that was very interesting. Mm-hmm.
When you got to Ball State, what were your first impressions, or what did you? That must have been quite a culture shock.
It's very different in every way. I wouldn't know where to begin. One thing I had a lot of difficulty was the music in our studio. It was rock and roll. It was not something I never heard. Well, it was something I never heard, listened to, and also I just really didn't appreciate. Not until at least, that's 81, probably somewhere between 84, 3 or even 4 years later, maybe, probably around 84, and I discovered the Beatles for the first time, which I actually liked. So that was sort of the turning point for me to appreciate the more contemporary, popular music of the West. But among other things.
I'm a huge Beatles fan. So from Ball State, what made you decide to go to UC Berkeley?
So again, although I was away in Nanjing from my family in Beijing for 3 years, and to be in the U.S. all by myself was more difficult. So I just wanted to be with my brother. My brother was at UC Berkeley. And then because of that, I didn't really apply for any other graduate schools. I applied for Berkeley. And my brother applied for more than one. So in the end, he didn't get in Berkeley. So a graduate school. He got in Yale. So we went like this. So I ended up on the West Coast, and so my dream really didn't come true. So it was that I had no idea about the school. But I was happy about my decision. I met in Muncie, at Ball State and Berkeley, some really excellent teachers, and I became also an educator myself. So looking back, I just had some of the amazingly good teachers. So I am, very thankful for my experience at both institutions.
And you did work briefly for an architect in San Francisco?
Yes, yes. I've worked for several, actually. I worked for several architects, but during the daytime, mostly for a Chinese American architect. His name he passed away a long time ago, Clement Chen Jr. And then in the evening, I also moonlighted for a number of architects. Stanley Sideways, who was my thesis advisor at Berkeley, and there were several other architects.
What made you decide at that point to focus on teaching rather than becoming a working architect?
One reason really was the teachers I had. At Ball State, I had a teacher whose name is Rodney Place. He's South African British, and he came to the U.S. from Architectural Association School of Architecture. It's kind of a silly name, so people usually just say AA. So he came from AA, the most experimental, radical school of architecture in the world at that time. So he came from AA, and to discover the U.S. He's like one of those. I didn't know that until later. He was very much, in a way, a romantic kind of a, South African slash European. So he had this idea of America that took him to teach especially in the Midwest. He wanted to see the real, America. Sounded like Sarah Palin, but that's not the point. A lot of people kind of see the middle part that way. So anyway, and he was more than an inspiration. I came from a kind of isolated society at that time to be exposed to Marcel Duchamp and French New Wave movies. All of that was an incredible experience. And then he's the best teacher I ever met. He could do one thing I still cannot, and other teachers I had was not able to. He would not give the students answer, even if we begged him. He wouldn't give in. So you really have to think about it on your own and figure things out. And then at Berkeley, I had a Swedish professor, Lars Lerup, who was also just really outstanding in his own ways. He could read the minds of the students. I didn't know how he does that. Partly has to do with his experience. So those people, when you have really good teachers, you tend to also want to teach yourself. That happened to me. And then Clement Chen's office, it was a letdown. Clement was a very good architect. If you have been to San Francisco, he actually designed the Holiday Inn Hotel in Chinatown. It's a landmark building. It's a concrete structure. You may or may not like it, but it's a very unique structure, original. And then he became a developer. He did mostly hotels and so on. So when I was working for him, he already in the developer's mode. He wasn't really interested in architecture or design. And then I always remember my teachers. By the way, they were both were also flamboyant in their lifestyles, and so Ronnie would drive a car from the 1940s, always have a fresh flower, and imagine in Muncie, quite something. So I just decided to try to teach.
So you taught at Ball State and Michigan and Berkeley and Rice. What made you decide to go back to Beijing?
While I was teaching, and I, in actually 86, the first year, I started in 85, and it took me a year to really get into teaching. So in 86, I decided to start to do my own work. So I was doing design competitions, there's a kind of odd phrase, theoretical design, meaning that I really didn't have clients to ask me to do anything. I would come up with design problems and then just work on them. I did that for 8 years. And then through that process, there's a increasing desire of really to make buildings. I got actually really very anxious, but yet without the social connections in the United States, and without also the social skills, I'm otherwise it's a very quiet person. I don't enjoy socializing, talking as much. So there weren't any opportunities, and then I at that time, so I was at Berkeley and as a visiting assistant professor, so I wasn't on tenure track or anything. And I won the competition to receive a traveling scholarship to travel in Europe for a year. Actually, I try to make everything a little more coherent and logic. The reality wasn't that as much. So the trip was, I'm still not a very good planner, so I never had much money, and I had a credit card with I think a $3,000 limit. At home, my wife and I really with that money we had more than enough. But when we were traveling, we constantly had problem. And then already for how many years we were never home for the Chinese New Year, which is still going on now this year. So we decided to go home. Oh, that's in January of 1983. So we went home during the holidays. There were a friend of a relative's neighbor, that kind of a thing, just came to our apartment, my parents' apartment actually, to say hello because he knew my wife, from their childhood, and then he asked if we would want to design an entertainment center. It actually meant a casino in southern China. That was our first commission. I was so thrilled because I just couldn't figure out for years who's gonna ask me to design a building, and then that's how we started. And although I got a teaching job at Rice University in Houston, but I was going back and forth. I really just wanted to build. So going back to China to build buildings, and then from Houston, so made the decision kind of easy. I had a hard time with Houston. It's the South. I'm a northerner, right? And then also the city. In my mind, it wasn't much a city, right? It just sort of a extended, suburbia, and so we were glad to leave Houston to some extent. Although I had a really good time at Rice University, made a lot of friends, and so on. Yeah.
So this was the beginning of your company.
Yeah. The beginning of the company was the dining table of in my parents' apartment.
So the name of your firm, I understand, translates to unusual architecture.
Or it's like this. It can be pronounced with different connotations. So the name of our firm, it's if I say 非常建筑, it's very subtle. People would treat it as really a noun. So it means unusual architecture, extraordinary architecture, abnormal buildings, whatever. And then if I make a comment and say, that looks pretty, 非常建筑, and it's very subtle, the difference. And it means that something looked very architectural, has a pure geometrical shape, for instance, and so on. So we casually picked up the name because we realized in the early 90s, individuals, qualifications and so on, was not really acknowledged as much as a company. So we registered a company in Houston at that time. I paid for $750, I think. I don't know what kind of registration that was. So we could hang on to a name for 10 years. In the first part of 93, we actually had 5 commissions in the end, and then none of them really worked out. So out of the frustration, my wife, who is also an architect, we have been practicing together all these years. So she said maybe we should call the company 非建筑, which means like non-architecture. So not architecture maybe. So I knew that wouldn't really be very attractive with our potential clients. So I added one word. I added the word ordinary. So it went from not architecture to not ordinary architecture. But it was a joke, it was. And then...
but became very successful.
Well, we can't change it. Other people wouldn't be able to find us, right? Yeah.
Why do you think the firm has been so successful in China?
We were early. We were dumb. I think that's very important. I'm not being modest, actually. I think Chinese culture, which I'm of course, part of it, but it has some elements I don't, to say the least, I'm not very good at. Probably to some extent, I don't even agree with. So basically, my years in the U.S. Was how should I put it? I don't mean in any kind of a negative connotation, but it's kind of a brainwash for me. In a way, I really didn't know it happened. When I went to the U.S., I came from an ideologically heavy country, and they were political studies every Saturday afternoon for for half a day was just ridiculous for me. So like a lot of people from China, I was very tired of politics and ideology, all of that. And then, however, so while I was in the U.S., so I had that attitude for many years. I didn't quite understand why especially when I was teaching my colleagues, were all so much into politics and so on. Let alone most of them, all of them, were and are all leftists anyway. So I just didn't quite understand that either. And however, not until I went back to China, that I realized in the process somewhere I have become a leftist myself. I'm probably center right, still not on the far right, center left, not on the far left. And I also realized how important that was for me, because I was able to resist some of the temptations of the market economy. And with that ideology I was able to focus on my work. Most people, being this Chinese thing, they were a lot more flexible. I was far less flexible than they are. They could do anything to be successful. I was just too damn principled. But I kind of think I want to be that way, and so that's the difference.
You must have, maybe not being as flexible, you must have offered something in your design that people actually wanted.
At the beginning, I tried to bullshit people to buy in my ideas, and I wasn't very successful. But I think I did well by moving my clients with my sincerity, because a couple of them told me so. They told me in the end they really wasn't convinced by what I was trying to tell them. But they thought, if these guys really want to do it, maybe he really, he got the point. So they let me to do it. And then my stubbornness, although I worked very hard and from the very beginning, so brought some built projects that eventually started to snowball. So it wasn't in the end, my words, but these projects that people can see and appreciate. Now that's something actually very interesting about architecture. Architecture is actually one of the least probably profound disciplines. Although if you read architectural theory, especially theories produced in the past 3 or so decades, they were pretty thick. It's not easy at all to decipher. But actually, architecture is a very down to earth, essential discipline. But the difficulty lies in the fact only when the building's up, everyone can really understand it. Otherwise, it is pretty abstract when it's on a sheet of paper. Even a very realistic drawing doesn't give you the experience of architecture. So that's what the difficulty is. So anyway, I kind of knew that. So I just wanted to, doesn't matter how small a project is, I only wanted to do projects I could realize. So and then I started to build a portfolio of work. Yeah.
So as you for a number of years you developed your company and you had increasing success, and then at some point you decided to come back to the United States, and I believe you were teaching at Harvard.
That was just one semester, and what happened was that I still today Beijing's little like Boston or New York. You see every architect from all over the world. So while in Beijing, I was teaching at Peking University. I had at that time very unusual lecture series, having a lot of the really big name architects from all over the world. So I made friends. So one, I think it was after I taught at Harvard as a visitor for a semester. And then on my way back to Beijing, I went to a party, an office, Christmas party. Oh, actually, at Stephen Hall's office. Stephen Hall designed the Siemens Hall dormitory here at MIT. So I got to know him in China. So I went over to Stephen's office to party, and we were just gossiping, and he teaches at Columbia. He started to talk about the dean search that was going on at Columbia. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the conversation, he said, hey, you could be the dean at Columbia. The position was held by this really influential Swiss architect, Bernard Schumi at the time. He's one of the, for the younger architects, he was one of the gods for it. So I thought he must be joking, but he looked very serious. So and he said, if the, I think the provost of Columbia contacts you, would you at least say you're willing to take part in the process? So I said, well, why not? And then there were other friends there, and I asked them, is Stephen serious? I asked probably a couple of people. They said, just ignore him. He's drunk. So and then of course I thought they were right. Stephen looked a bit drunk anyway. and then I didn't hear a thing for a few months. Pretty much forgot about it. And then all of a sudden I did hear, and I got an email from the provost of Columbia. And then I was told there was a very long short list. There were 20-some people on the short list. And then from that point on, I would receive an email every a week or two and say the short list being shortened. And then you see it was 21 last week, and now it's 20. So, but I stayed on that short list until the very end, and the search committee, I heard that actually decided I was the top candidate, although I think the runner-up got the job and so on. So at that point, there were two things. One was that I started to seriously considering a teaching position in the U.S. So it started as a joke in a way. And then I got approached by various institutions. But so one morning, I went to the office, and there was a fax. Today when you receive a fax, it's just quite an unusual event. It came from MIT. It came from Dean Adele Santos, and inviting me to have an interview. I said in the next, I don't know how long, several weeks at least, I wasn't able to go to the U.S. And then probably that was another fax from her saying, in that case, I'm coming over to Beijing. So that's how it started. And then it turned out, really among all the offers I had, MIT's was by far the most challenging and most exciting. So I thought I was not that old, 5 years ago. So I should really take on MIT rather than the more comfortable ones. So here I am.
What was it about, what was the appeal of coming back and teaching in the U.S. since you were teaching in Beijing?
It wasn't really just teaching in the U.S. Because I taught for a long time, I started to get some ideas about what architecture education probably should be. So I was getting very ambitious. So in China, I was tackling some more basic issues in architecture education. But I want to also tackle some more the cutting edge issues, and I wanted to really change the way architectural education was, in a way still is, in the U.S. So and with that, with my overblown ambition, I thought coming back to the U.S. was very, very interesting. So I had an interest in education. U.S. would be the country, and MIT would be the right school, because I sensed already, now it's crystal clear, but at that time, still there were little vague, but I sensed really the importance of a number of things, including, of course, technology and environmental issues and so on. How they would reshape architecture, the practice, is happening in practice actually faster than in education, and so education ought to be very different than the one I had in a way, especially than the way I taught. Now I looked back, really I was teaching not the right things to my students. So I decided to come back, and also nobody told me, and it was impossible to do this transcontinental global practice. Thanks to technology, in fact, it did work out. It wasn't, it's still not easy, but it's actually, in a way, it's possible. Again, I wasn't, I was hot-headed, as I have been always, I guess. So I just came. It's like the way I went to Rice University. I never really visited Houston. I put my things in the car with my wife from California. We just drove to Houston, and then we discovered a city. So we weren't as sure anyway.
What is it? How would you define what you think architecture education should be about?
It's, at MIT, if I say the way I think architecture or architectural education should be, everyone understands. But if you know how architecture is being taught in the U.S., and so that's a different story. For the past, again, probably close to 4 decades now, there was kind of a revolution in education, not only in architecture. I read in the Financial Times, actually fairly recently, maybe a year ago, an article about English education at Harvard. This guy who's a Brit, he came here to study English. He ended up learning everything but English. They discussed racial issues, gender issues, so of course literature and everything else, but not English. Architecture has been taught sort of that way, not as bad. We actually didn't use the word building because that considered to be too perfunctory. It was a dirty word. So architecture is okay to say, and you have to talk about pretty big abstract theories. So architects were reading Jacques Derrida, of grammatology. I don't remember the names of his books. So they were pretty thick post-structural philosophies, and hoping that it would generate ideas. Of course, it might, for some architects, but I don't believe that's how architecture should really be taught, because there are a lot of things. Number one, they are more fundamental. Secondly, they are the issues we are confronted with in an urgent way than French philosophy. And we got to take on, it's like the energy issue, the environmental issue, the advancement of technology, globalization, the changing of practice, and so on. So basically, architecture has become for a while a really kind of a arbitrary subject. And when you do design a building, it's always a house ideally for monk poet. There's only one architect ever get to do that. Someone in Japan did it, but otherwise, where do you find a monk poet, or you do an art museum, and nothing bigger than that. Architects don't do shopping malls, don't do factories, and don't do this and that. We don't do much in the end. So I was actually, there are actually many other reasons for me to be here, and one of them actually is also the long tradition of carrying social concerns in design work and so on at MIT. So anyway, I thought so social, environmental, and technological, all these things got to be part of the curriculum, so that our students, when they graduate, so they can directly contribute to the society, not via the discipline, via design, not to think about contribute to the discipline first. I think it's only a slight difference. In the end, it's probably the same thing, but I felt very strong about that.
If you could sort of take yourself back to 2005, can you
Yeah.
remember what your first impressions of the students at MIT and how MIT felt different than other places you had taught?
I actually told, doesn't matter anyway. So I had a kind of a interview at that point. So I still remember probably that was Scott Campbell in our school, and the amazing experience, because I've taught in the U.S., I've taught in Chinese university, in the Peking University, also is one of the Peking University and Tsinghua University. You got the best students from China there, but my wife and I were here for the interview, maybe for house hunting already. We just remember one thing. I wish I still got that, because after being here for so long, I got used to it. Just how the faces of students and people actually looked different. You see how smart they are. You see that in the eyes. It's an amazing thing for us. So you look at the eyes of these young people. Maybe today I would say probably has to do with the kind of a nerdiness we kind of cherish here, but they looked terribly intelligent, and we were impressed. I only remember that instance one more time when I was in the U.S. only for a year, and Rodney Place I was talking about took some of the students to Cranbrook, and I remember seeing students had a very different sort of a gaze in the eyes. They looked kind of they were a bunch of people working in the basement. They looked like monks, got this kind of ascetic kind of a look in their eyes, which I remember. And otherwise, it's the MIT look in the eyes. Sometimes I still look for that. I don't really see it because I see it every day, so I don't. But still, once in a while, people here always reminds me how how really intelligent human beings can be.
In what ways does MIT, being at MIT, help your work, help your architecture work, your professional side?
I just told a student how much I envy him. If I were a student here, I think MIT would help me even more. I really wanted to study here, but anyway, I'm very lucky as it is. So basically, it's this. So I developed a perspective on architecture through my practice in China. I realized how important that is for an architect to really understand how a building, first of all, is put together. So we need to understand the nuts and bolts. And also, I realized that there are a lot of technology out there would really help us to make a better building, a cheaper building, and a more sustainable building. And we really need to know that these technologies. And then the structure of the knowledge in architecture, as the way I learned, were not really helping us in that direction. So when I came to MIT, I did want to learn all of that. Again, as I was saying earlier, of course I was not a student. I wasn't able to have the time to take courses and so on. But I got exposed to a lot of different things. Within our department, some of my colleagues, one of them actually studying the kind of new materials like fiber, concrete, and so on. And then I remember going to the Department of Chemistry to listen to a lecture. It was very interesting. It was about really designing new materials on the nano level and so on. I started, I don't know how many years ago, probably close to the time maybe a year or two, even before, maybe in 03, 04, I developed an interest in plastic. And that interest now is also is still there. We're doing a number of projects with fiberglass, polycarbonate, polyethylene. Although I probably didn't directly pick up some of these things at MIT, but I really pick up that kind of spirit here very much. This is talking about. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I actually have. Actually, I mean in a very kind of a good way. I have this kind of a stereotypical image of an MIT professor who would have a beard, kind of on the bigger side, wearing shorts and T-shirt all year round. I don't know if you interview people, they actually look like this. Some are probably not. They are PhD students. There are people who look like that. Believe it or not, when I see people like this, I don't know them. I don't know what they do. It always is a reminder of why I am here. I don't know if you probably should edit that out, and politically probably is not correct. It's just kind of a funny thing. So in that way, I'm just talking about, I probably got an education at MIT. And that's, the look of the people, the labs, when I look into them, again, I'm clueless as to what they're trying to achieve. But they're a reminder of the things I'm really interested. So I'm building a house using fiberglass for the structure. And then we are completing the Shanghai Corporate Pavilion for the Expo in Shanghai, World Expo, that opens in early May using a lot of polycarbonate tubes with LED lights, with water for mist making, and with water for energy. We're doing solar, thermal, and then thermal and electricity exchange, and so on. So I think that's how had to do with my MIT side.
So you're able to take ideas and concepts that you pick up here and then put them to work in your design.
Yeah, and just again, really, it's just the spirit of it. There's an atmosphere. I don't know how much is in my department, but here, that's why I was saying, you just see it. You see it on your way to your office, on your way to maybe the lunch place in Stata Center. Yeah.
How would you describe the great strengths of the Department of Architecture?
Our school, as you constantly probably hear, and it is really we're the oldest school of architecture in the U.S. For me, of course, that's very important, but also we are in a way one of the youngest schools also in the U.S. because we're a school on the rise, and we are as a faculty we are very much determined to really make big changes. I started to talk a lot about changes before President Obama. Just kidding, but in a way it's true, right? So anyway, so we're not burdened by our history, and right now, in the past 5 years, and the one thing I did, I'm very proud of, is to in a way to rebuild the faculty by hiring so far 9 new people. So we have a lot of our peer schools. They have a world-class visiting faculty, especially the Ivy League schools. They were able to have a lot of visitors from elsewhere here for a semester or on a fairly regular basis even, and so on. But I'm very comfortable to say that as far as an in-house faculty, and right now we're the strongest in the country. And then our design faculty are from all over the world, from Asia, India, Korea, Japan, China, and so on, and from Europe, from the UK, from Belgium, and so on. And then also they are the middle-aged, more mature level of people like myself and like Rahul Malhotra from India, Nader Tarani, who has become a local practice, one of the best offices in the U.S., but he's from Iran, and so on. Then we have a tier of upcoming and young designers and scholars and so on. So university is all about the faculty. We could have a bigger, this I'm actually paraphrasing the first president of Peking University, because in Chinese we say university, the big school. In Chinese, 大学, 大 meaning big. So he said the big school is not about big facility and big buildings and so on, big campus. And he said big school is about big ideas, and it's about not a lot of people, not the big in terms of size, but about a big faculty. So I really believe what he said.
What do you think that? What do you think MIT's architecture department and school? What does that offer that other schools in this country or around the world do not offer?
We're not quite there yet, but eventually we ought to offer two things which other schools may not able to do as well because they don't have the resources. One is, of course, technology. The way technology has infiltrated our life, the iPhones and all these IDs and iPads and all these things, and the other thing, it has to do with a long MIT tradition, is on the urban front. So in the 60s, 70s, at MIT, we developed a very strong research about city and in urbanism. When we say urbanism, is how we see cities being designed. Although actually it started in mid 40s. So that tradition. So we have the best Department of Planning here at MIT, best in the U.S. And then I see, although they don't really design, I see the combination of their knowledge and of our design ability. We really have the opportunity to be the best for urbanism and for urban design and so on. So in these two fronts, architecture that embraces technology and architecture combined with urbanism, and again, there's a bit of the other things, and but I think we really have a very good chance to excel, to be the best. Yeah.
Since you're head of the Department of Architecture, is being an administrator, is that something that helps you achieve your goal? Is it something that is time-consuming and keeps you from your design work? How does that fit in?
That's actually a question I'm still trying to figure out. First of all, I'm not very good at the administration and management maybe. But as an architect, it really is a very important part of our work. By having this job, I've become better in managing things. Again, it's a very good learning experience. Still to balance my time, to really, what would be the word, to further develop my own administrative skills and these things. It's quite a struggle, I have to say. But luckily, I have a really a fantastic sidekick. I have an associate department head, Leslie Norford. He's a professor of building technology. His field is mechanical engineering. I have to say, engineers are better in that front. A lot of architects are pretty good, but and with his help, I'm so lucky that really as a team we worked out very well. So, and then I have also really a first-rate assistant, and Simonovich. She's been at MIT for 30 some years, maybe by now 35 years, and so on. And most time she spent in architecture. She would, for me, although it's not only that she helps a lot, so kind of make up my shortcoming in administration, but one remarkable thing, she would say, I was mentioning a name, probably an icon in design. She would say, yeah, I remember him. She used to come to MIT. It was quite a remarkable thing. The other day, she, I don't know if you are interested in design as much. I didn't know. I think George Nelson used to. If you go to design within Rich on SF, probably he's like the Eames, Ray and Charles Eames. He designed so many things we still use, wall clocks and couches and this and that. And Anne would know him. No, that's beside the point. It has nothing to do with administration. But when we talk about administration, I couldn't help but think of people I worked together in the department headquarters. So.
There was something intriguing that you said. You thought that wisdom is important in architecture. Can you talk a little about why wisdom is so important?
Today, if we talk about aesthetics, probably we can't get two people to agree on much, right? Something is pretty or ugly, there is just no one set of criteria, right? We can use. And then what is funny, what is humorous, what's not? What would make you tickle and laugh? What would make me tickle and laugh? Who knows? But I find what's consistent, is actually the intelligence in art, even in comedy, and in the true sense of humor has to do with intelligence or wisdom. So in design, I'm afraid it's probably also true. So it's not so much an expression of a personality, or rather personality expressed in architectural forms, and if it's geometry or shape or material choices and so on. But rather, the architect or designer has really discovered something, and then put that something into the design. So that's wisdom. So in my case, I don't do it that well, but I'm not really interested in big, formal expressions. I think architecture is really interesting because it's an integral part of a daily life. So I watch too many the French New Wave movies, right? So they could be pretty boring. They could be very interesting. It all depends on your outlook of daily life. And then there are these little small wisdoms you pick up. You look at how people would appreciate a setting of dinner and so on. That gives pleasure to people. And then often there's something smart about it, so that it's not sake for in the form for for the sake of forms. There's something you discover, you learn. I think that's really nice. Be it again everyday or philosophical, often that they could come together. That's so. Have you seen the movie Over the Sky of Berlin?
No.
It is made by, what's the director's name? Who also made the Paris, Texas. He's famous. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, in that movie, there was an American actor who used to play a detective called Columbo.
Peter Falk.
Peter Falk. He was in that movie in a cold Berlin morning. Berlin was 15 degrees below zero Celsius about a week ago. Still, Berlin gets cold. In a very cold morning, he was holding a cup of coffee, very hot, in his hand. He's standing outside, and he was talking about his philosophy of life. Of course, it was that. That's kind of wisdom. The cold morning with a hot cup of coffee in his hand, and so although in that case it's his revelation, but I think wisdom is on that level sometimes.
Is there, when you approach a design or a design problem, is there a particular goal that you have in mind?
My goal, if there's one, I want to, there are a lot of pretty serious, yet basic goals. There are needs of people that architecture should meet, be it really, comfort or, convenience, and there are loftier goals of inspiring people. So that's why an old big library would look like a cathedral. I may not do that myself, but I understand why it was designed that way and so on. But yet, there's one goal, if I could, I would like to always achieve, is to delight people. I don't actually like things serious. I have to do things serious because I got the responsibilities. But otherwise, if anything that is delightful, I love to do that.
Is that why you think one of your designs, Split House, has gotten so much attention?
There's, I don't think I'm not even old enough. I'm pretty old, but not enough to develop some really good wisdoms yet. But, I got clever from time to time. So that was one of those projects. There were some actually very clear intentions. It means that I did understand something. I digested what I observed and spit out. So it's better than something is still being digested, half-baked. So Split House really had to do with a number of things. And one thing, it was very important for me personally, was the fact I had a courtyard house in my mind. I grew up in a courtyard house in the city of Beijing. I left the courtyard house when I was 13 years old. Of course, I had no idea that was still the house I lived the longest. I never lived in the house that long ever since. I moved around a lot. So in that house, I understood a particular kind of living environment. When I designed the split house, it was there. So basically, a courtyard house would allow one to live in an introverted cosmos, pretty much. So you have a piece of sky, you have a piece of ground right in the center, and then you live around it. However, when I worked on the split house, I realized that was also an urban house. The introverted quality is for the density of the city. It wouldn't make sense when we were doing in a house in the open landscape. So, and then after many rounds, actually, I came to the final version of it. So basically, there is an enclosure of a courtyard, but yet it's enclosed half by the natural element, the slope, half by buildings, by the artificial. So that's what the house came to be. And then as if a house being split in the middle to make the artificial half, and then the slope. So that was one of the ideas.
Your area of interest is around the intersection of city and tradition and materiality. Is that how I would understand it? Can you talk a little bit about?
That's what I put down many years ago. I am interested in these subject matters. Tradition sounds very general. They all sound very general and generic and broad. But the reason I had it is that for my generation and the younger generation of Chinese architects and designers, there is a very strong tendency to ignore our traditions, which I find really problematic, actually, because I'm actually a big fan of Japanese design, from architecture to industrial design, to fashion design, to graphic design. Japan is a big design country. What I learned from my Japanese counterparts, they were able to combine the tradition and almost the ultra modern. I believe that we could do that as well. Our traditions are different from the Japan's, although we share a number of them and so on. I just remember, again, as a person, I'm interested in the way people look very much. Who actually I know pretty well, who's a structural engineer. He designed some of the really the most fascinating structures. His name is Kawaguchi, and he worked with the architect Isozaki and so on. Design those structures can be lifted up from the ground, so it could be built very quickly and so on. So Kawaguchi used to take me and others to karaoke, and he would sing very traditional songs. And then I got to know him better. He actually told me that he belongs to how do you say a singing group? What's the word?
It's a choir
A
or
choir,
choral
maybe.
group.
Yeah. So anyway, so he actually told me he would have done the very traditional outfit and then to sing. So can you imagine? I don't think it's a split of a personality, but rather it's a pretty high level of integration of a culture. So I kind of interested in that very much. And then, of course, city is something people actually living in. I don't believe people living in a building or a house first. People live in a city first. Otherwise, if you only live in a building, you're in a prison, right? And so the importance of city is something cannot be really underestimated. And then today, of course, I'm actually very much interested in technology and environmental issues, energy, and so on. So I am interested in material very much, and I'm interested in new materials, actually, in the plastics again. So my material interest has to do with my environmental concerns and my technological concerns. That really haven't really changed that much in that regard. However, in the past few years, with a colleague in my office who's a graduate of MIT, we have also been working on product design. Now that's something new for our office, for myself. So we have done Chinaware, we have done glassware, decanters for Western wine, and kind of a, what's the word? Carafe? Is that no? So something.
Carafe, yes.
Carafe, right? To hold rice wine, and so on. We're designing a teapot. We just finished the design of vinegar and oil and vinegar set. Now we're working on a salt and pepper set. We're working on a teapot using traditional purple clay. That probably doesn't make sense. It's kind of a thing you see it, you know. It's kind of a very dark chocolate color clay. It's the best thing for making tea because the clay is porous, would absorb the flavor of the tea in a way. So and then even more recently, we are starting a clothing line, our office. So my interest is actually all over. That's the only thing I can't really convince my students is to focus because I don't do very well myself.
Um, what do you see ahead for architecture? What kind of advice do you give your students?
Um, and I think to prepare the career of an architect, students really should, it sounds like a cliche at MIT. It's not really, it's about mind and hands, right? Man and madness, whatever. Um, because although of course we think, right? But we are dealing with the physical world. So an architect is interested in this and that. You don't only want to look at it to understand, you want to touch it. It's wood, it's not cold. If it's metal, it would have a very different feel. Before I ever lifted a piece of stone at Peking University, there were a lot of old relics laying around because it's part of the royal garden palaces from the Qing dynasty. So one day, I saw a piece of architecture. It's stone, really very nicely sculpted somehow in the wrong place. So I wanted to move it. I got some students, initially actually 3, and plus myself, 4 of us. I thought we could move it. I really had no idea how heavy stone was. And then eventually we got 8 people to move it. So when you understand the heaviness of stone, you can truly appreciate the lightness of a Gothic cathedral, which is also made of stone. So the medieval Europeans, they were able to come up with this challenge. Let's make a very light stone building. It's just really outrageous, totally crazy. See, that's architecture. So if you only look at architecture, buildings, you could be a scholar, but I don't think you can be an architect. So it's very important to do hands-on work. And we don't do enough of it in our department at this point.
Are you involved at all in the expansion plans for MIT?
No, I wish. I think I have ideas. At one breakfast, I had over the Grey House with our president. I was talking a bit about that, but I'm not sure if she thought I was crazy anyway. Because my understanding of city, my understanding of architecture is about life. So city is a place where people live. So it means that unless you're doing some heavy industrial production, you pretty much can live at a place you work, you social, you do you shop, and then you have cultural activities and so on. So a mixture of all these different needs is very important. Cambridge as a city is not as mixed as Boston, for instance, and it doesn't really have the right density. MIT as a campus could use more density, could be a lot more mixed. in the way is planned. Now there's too much segregation of the dormitories, of and the teaching facilities, and we don't have enough amenities. We could have more cafes and shops and all of that, and again mixed with our classical monumental buildings. I think we ought to lighten up. We need some daily little delights here and there.
Well, maybe they'll ask you to design something.
Yeah, there's a policy which wouldn't allow, a rather recent policy that wouldn't allow our faculty, our meaning architecture faculty, to be involved in designing things on campus. I don't think that's right. Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of our time.
Okay.
One thing I want to make sure I ask you is, despite the fact that your family did not think much of your art as a child, you are reasonably well known as an artist. And I'm interested in what it is you're able to do and say in your art that you aren't able to do or say in your architecture.
That's an interesting question. I still have an interest in art. Not that I would never come back to painting, but right now at least I find architecture a lot more interesting as an art form. Actually, it's more challenging too. Making architecture is like making film. You work with a big team of people, and then you have to really be very careful with the resources, because you get to be in charge of big money and so on. And then when it comes to art, we do art installations for biennales, for museums, and so on. They are really smaller, just much smaller architectural projects with not as much resources, and it's done quickly. And so they're more lighthearted in some way. That's probably one reason I could never really be an artist, because real artists, although they may again have wisdom or delight, but they treat their art projects just as seriously, right? But for me, I'm getting more serious, because when I started to do art project, they were like really extracurricular, activities. So today, coming back to your question, if I'm gonna really pick up art again, it can't be installations, and because they are too close to architecture. I would rather paint. The last painting I did was probably in 92 or 91, when I was teaching at Berkeley. Painting is something, oil painting is something that it gives me freedom. I think a kind of freedom. Usually I don't even desire, I like the limitation of design work, lots of it. And then I work like a detective, and I work through the limitations. But maybe if I paint again, I rather want the freedom.
Well,
So anyway.
maybe it's easier without the whole team
Exactly.
to just say what you want to say.
Right, right, yeah.
So, I didn't get to all of the questions I had, but we have about 5 minutes. And
Okay.
what I'd like to know is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important to add about MIT, about your philosophy of architecture, about the future, about anything?
I have a very serious suggestion for MIT. I never really get to say. Maybe I'll say it to you, so it's on the record. After all we talked about, I really think the quality of life is very important. So I was reading Time magazine the other day. I didn't know that I have a whole foods lifestyle, but I fit in that category so well. I was a little surprised. Not only we shop at Whole Foods, we actually drive a Prius, and my wife does yoga, so we do all of that. And you don't have to do that, but the point is, of course, in the end, we should care about the quality of life as we do as architects for other people. We should do that to ourselves. So, my grand suggestion for MIT is to officially have a 1 hour lunch break for the entire institute. During that an hour, of course, we need better cafes and restaurants, and then we can eat a decent meal. And my recommendation, it wouldn't hurt to have a glass of wine even during the lunch break. And then you meet more people at MIT. You enjoy life at MIT a lot more. So 1 hour lunch break is my suggestion to MIT. I know it's a long tradition not to have a lunch break, but it wouldn't hurt to start that. I think the creativity and productivity would go up. I believe in that.
That would be everybody taking the same hour.
Oh, yeah. And class, meeting, work would be totally forbidden during that 1 hour. 12:30 to 1:30 sounds pretty good. That's it.
That's a very interesting, I could just imagine all the collaboration and connecting that people could do if that's what they were supposed to do for that amount of time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and it is on the record.
Okay.